Hello, and welcome to Mindframe, where shift happens, a podcast where we sit down with people who've experienced really difficult things in their lives and we talk to them about the kind of incremental shifts or serendipitous moments that they've experienced that have helped them get to the other side, to a place of hope and healing. I'm your host, Bobby Solomon, and I'm not a mental health professional. However, I have experienced quite a bit of mental health struggle, and I have a lot of mental health issues in my family. This podcast is not meant to be a substitute for professional help, but merely a place where people can come and listen to inspiring triumph of the spirit stories. So please, if you are struggling, get that help. That help is out there. And at the end of the episode, we have numbers that you can reach out to. All our episodes are recorded via Zoom, so please excuse any audio issues. Trigger warning, this episode deals with eating disorders, anorexia in particular, and mental health issues. Today's episode, we're talking to Jenni, who's a podcaster herself. And she's dealt with mental illness and an eating disorder. And I feel like your story is really an inspiration. So welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, Bobby, thank you for having me.
Can we start off with you just telling me a little bit about yourself that you want to highlight and then a little bit about your podcast?
Sure. Well, I am 27. I currently live in Paris, France, and travel around the world for my blog and podcast. I started out as an actress and kind of worked my way into writing and creating. And Cageless, my podcast, kind of came to fruition after exhaling a lot of my thoughts and feelings about my own mental health, my own journey with anorexia, depression, and anxiety. And, on TikTok, there's a lot of things that I guess people didn't really want to talk about or, there wasn't much of advice for. And so that's kind of how Cageless came to be. And it's been really fun and scary. And as you know, sharing the deep parts of yourself online, it's not like, oh, I'm just sharing makeup tutorials or sports videos or which those things are awesome too. But, when you're really putting yourself on the chopping block, you're not an avatar of yourself. You are yourself. So thank you for being a part of conversations that I think are really important on the World Wide Web.
Well, congratulations on your success with your podcast. The fact that you're going deep and talking about issues that a lot of people, as you also mentioned, don't necessarily open up about, or there aren't that many outlets for them to go other than a psychologist and listening to, lectures or reading books. So to see someone like you who's kind of vibrant, traveling, been through stuff, and now, sharing that and exploring topics is really amazing. And I commend you for that.
Thank you.
Anorexia is a very, very, very sad and scary disease. I've had friends who have had it and ended up being hospitalized for months. And there are so many things that I've heard from them about kind of what their brain felt like and how they looked at themselves and what some of the factors were. But it would be amazing to hear from you kind of what your experience was from like when you realized this was happening and kind of how some of the ups and downs that you kind of dealt with.
I think it's the devil's nastiest trick. It's a disease that so many people don't know about. It's this very taboo thing that a lot of women mostly struggle with in silence. And the beginning of my disordered eating habits started when I was like 8 years old. And so it's been a lifelong battle. And
okay, so put me in the mind of the 8-year-old who is now not deciding, but moving into abnormal, let's say, or unhealthy eating habits.
I remember feeling very uncomfortable in my body, and I loved Britney Spears. And I remember watching her like dancing, and she had, like the really short crop tops, and this like little 8-year-old girl is like, oh, I want to look like that. And I remember looking at my body and thinking like, I don't look like that. But I noticed that when I suck in, this is so dark. I don't think I've ever talked about this publicly. I've talked with my therapist about it, but I remember thinking, if I suck in a whole lot and I don't breathe, then like I look like her. And then that's kind of when I started restricting my diet and thinking like, oh, well, the less that I eat, the more I look like I'm sucking in and the more I can look like Britney Spears.
What was your weight like? How would you classify yourself when you first like sucked in your stomach and said, oh, I can look like this? Like,
Oh, I was a normal 8-year-old.
okay.
I'm not quite sure how much I weighed, but I
No, I
was,
don't want to know that. I just want to,
yeah,
like, you weren't overweight. And
right,
it wasn't like you were just perfect for you.
right,
And then you decided that you needed to be something else because you wanted to look like Britney.
right.
Okay.
And then I started to learn the less I eat, the more powerful I feel. Like I feel like I can control the substances that go in me and I can still survive. And so that's kind of when the anorexia really started to form on like a neurological level.
And how old were you at
And
that point?
um I would say the first therapist that I went to, I was 15. And
So that's
so
7 years of struggling before
yeah.
really talk. Like, did you talk to anyone about it?
Well, my parents noticed that my eating habits were odd, but they were like, "Oh, she's going through puberty," or "Oh, she's whatever." But I'm from a very conservative Christian background where it's like, well, if you have a problem, give it to God, or like God's your therapist, or you're fine, push it away. And so I never felt comfortable talking with anyone about this. And any woman I think can relate that not eating, especially in the generation that I grew up in, was considered cool. It's like, how much control can you have? How many carbs can you not eat? Or how thin can you look? I think of the Mean Girls scene where Regina George is like trying on the dress and she had been eating too much. And the woman who was fitting her said something like, well, we don't carry past like a size 4. So maybe you can try a different store.
Oh my
And it's like, oh my gosh, that kind of stuff actually happens.
Yeah, it was designed to be funny and whatever, but there is truth in it. And that is
Right.
horrifying. It's like you're defined by your size on
Right.
a certain level.
And the way that you look, and it's cultural and it's social. I always wanted to be better, more perfect, wanting to go towards this like Barbie archetype of a person because that's what the society that I lived in pushed me towards. And I noticed that I was treated differently, because my weight fluctuated my entire life. So that was kind of the formation beginning of it. And then, as you get older and you're a woman in this world, things change. But yeah, I think that all of the things that I've worked through with my therapist, a lot of it comes down to control. And a lot of it comes down to how much of you are you willing to sacrifice to succumb to what society thinks that you should be. And
So what do
I've
you
learned
mean by that?
like looking a certain way, acting a certain way. And I do think that things have changed for the most part, especially with the entire like Kardashian look movement. It's much more different than it was like maybe in like the 90s, early 2000s, where it was more like the Kate Moss is like the archetype of a woman. But so much of what I've worked through has to do with control, not as much what I look like. Because you learn really quickly being thin in a society where it's praised to be thin doesn't actually bring you anything amazing. Being treated differently because of the way that you look isn't a good thing. In fact, it's been humiliating for me because it's like, oh, I am pushed to the side because of, I look a certain way. So like my intelligence is completely out the window in a lot of different instances.
It's interesting that you say that because, obviously, if someone doesn't conform to what society's idea of beauty is, because it really changes around the world, right? To a certain
Yeah,
extent. And now with
definitely.
media globalizing, it's really, it's conforming a little more. It's coming together,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
it's still their ideas of beauty that are different in different cultures. And people who don't fall into that, all from what I hear, some of the pain is if they're insecure is all they want to be is that, which is kind of like what you were as an 8-year-old. Like you
Yeah,
want to be that. And what's so hard for people to understand is that exactly what you're saying. When you are that, you do get treated differently.
Mm-hmm.
but it's assumed that you are all good. You're
Mm-hmm.
perfect. Nothing's
Right.
wrong with you. You have no struggles, no worries. I grew up that way. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was very lucky,
Mm-hmm.
with the gene pool coming
Right.
out physically. So like physical attributes, athletics, but in terms of, my mental situation, it was rough, like I love my parents in different ways, but it was really tough growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And no one understood that I was struggling inside.
Right.
And I developed a lot of like panic attack, like throwing up when I was nervous. And I talked to a therapist. And one of the things that we talked about, it's like you want to show the world that you're in pain. And so here is me. This throw up is me, not this outside thing. So is that what you're talking about when
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, where I was kind of standardizing like men and women, but like I think men have an even more difficult time of being able to communicate what's going on the inside, even if their outside looks okay. But the thing is with eating disorders is whatever your sector of disordered eating is, whether that's overeating, undereating, binge purging, whatever that is, it's really easy to do in secret. And whatever's going on the inside, you don't have to talk about because you kind of solve it by yourself, especially with any sort of mental disease. Depression's another really great example. You don't always know if someone's depressed. You don't always know if someone's anxious. And with anorexia, you get to a point where your outside does not look okay. But there are also people that struggle with eating disorders that you don't know about. Your habits and your behaviors don't always reflect on the outside. When it gets to extremes, I got to a point where like I, was a walking skeleton. I lost my period. I had really bad acne. I was losing my hair. I was losing my nails.
at your height of like anorexia, how
Mm.
little were you consuming in a day?
I would say the lowest that I ever set the bar to was under 1,000. And as like a 5'7" girl, it's like that's completely unrealistic, especially someone who, at one point I was training for a marathon, running up to like 11 miles a day and trying to eat less than 1,000 calories is like,
God. And so did you have body dysmorphia? Like when you looked in the mirror, did you think you weren't as skinny as you were? Or,
yes.
okay. So when did you realize that you were actually as skinny as you were?
Oh, I don't think that I ever did when I was in it. I think that I can only see it now. Seeing pictures, and then I mean, you can look at a weight on a scale and be like, oh, it's not that bad because you're sick in the head. But it's like, oh, looking down and seeing those kind of numbers on anyone but yourself, you'd be like, are you okay? It got to the point where obviously I had to be hospitalized.
That's wild. Yeah. Cause people don't really understand body dysmorphia and like the
Right.
idea that like you look in the mirror and you're actually not seeing what's there. Cause I
Right.
hear people say like, oh my God, can you believe like how does she let herself get that skinny? It's like, well,
Right.
she doesn't think she is, obviously.
Yeah.
How old were you at that point?
22. But ironically, that was not the worst of my behaviors. Like the worst of my behaviors was when I was 17 and I still looked okay.
Can you just discuss the differences between those?
Totally. When I was 17, obviously, young women at that age it's all your body's changing, your mind is changing, your world is changing. And I was not always extremely strict in my eating behaviors. And most people aren't. From the support rooms that I've been in, the therapist office that I've been in, the more that I've learned about eating disorders, it's an in and out thing. Sometimes you're a little bit more extreme. Sometimes you're, not active at all, like a lot of addictions.
Like
And
depending what's going on in your life around you
yeah,
and
totally,
the age you're in. Okay.
totally. And how much you're taking care of yourself and being honest with yourself. So when I was 17, I was preparing to go to college. I was like in my first real relationship and I felt so out of control, So it's like, what's the one thing that a human can control if you're a privileged person? How much they eat and how much they sleep, usually.
Right.
And so I it's awful to think about, but I used to drink almost 2 gallons of water a day because I was like, oh, the more water I drink, the clearer my skin is. The more I pee, the less I weigh. Just like sadistic things like that. And still to this day at 27, 10 years later, I still don't have an even like pH balance in my body.
So your pH level or whatever your
Mhm.
body is changed is directly related to just that excess water intake, or are there other
Well,
things that
drowning
contributed?
myself,
Wow.
essentially.
I didn't even think about the idea that you could actually overdo it with water.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, 100%. I do remember the first specialist that I spoke with about this. And I was like, oh, like I I've drank a lot of water, whatever. And he's like, how much? And I told him, and he was like, you were drowning yourself, literally drowning yourself.
So what was your reaction to that?
Well, I was like, oh my God, am I ever going to be normal again? First of all, I pee 100 times a day.
Feel free to take a pee break if you need to.
Right. Well, I have gotten to the point where, I did have to go through a rehabilitation program and everything. But even to this day, when I get anxious, I get really, really thirsty. And it's just kind of like a trigger for my body.
It's a
And
total Pavlovian
yeah.
deal.
And, I don't talk about this stuff like at large by any means, because it's like, oh, is that actually true? Are you crazy? And it's like, I wish that if all of us would just like stop calling each other crazy or like believing one another, when it's like, when I get anxious, I get hives, or when I get anxious, I can't sleep, or when I get really depressed, I really am hungry for this, or like whatever. Because denying someone's needs or how they feel or what they think is such a dangerous game to play, especially with your children, because you go throughout your whole life and you're like, oh, well, are my needs actually valid? Like, am I actually anxious? Like, am I actually upset? Am I actually depressed? So that's why I think it's really important to, share these kind of things. So maybe someone else would think like, oh, maybe I'm not crazy, because you're probably not.
It's so like you saying that just like drilled something in my head is that I my God. So I remember when I was younger, when I started kind of battling with anxiety or just couldn't be like in a closed space with someone I was uncomfortable around. So whether that's like a girlfriend that I'm just starting to date or people I don't know that well, it was usually around girls, but sometimes around like families who I thought maybe were like kind of judging me, and I just felt like a pressure. So I would have to throw up. So there are times in my car and with my dad that I'm driving, and then all of a sudden, like someone's in the car, I'm nervous. We stop the car at a red light and I get out and I throw up and I come back in. And then obviously we don't talk about it in that moment. It's like, oh, I'm feeling sick or something, and then, but when we get home, I remember like I would talk to my dad saying, yeah, I'm just like nervous. And I'm like, I don't know, anxious. Like, I don't even know if I knew the word anxious back then.
Right.
But he's like, oh my God, you're crazy. You know how many people would
You're
love to have
crazy.
your life? You know how many people would like kill to have what you have with this, with that, with whatever? Like, that's ridiculous that you're nervous. And it's like, and then you're caught in this thing believing, okay, is it ridiculous? Am I crazy? Is anyone going to care that like I have these feelings? And I know, I mean, you can make this sound like, oh, poor you, but that mental like tyranny that you put yourself through, or that
It's
I put
hell.
myself through, was so brutal. And one person on the podcast actually said he was in a car accident and he lost the use of his limbs. And he said when he was in a deep depression, that was more paralyzing than him actually not being able to use his limbs.
Because mental health isn't visible so much of the time, and we live in such a visual world, especially now, that if you can't see it, did it really happen? Picture it didn't happen. And we're all really good at putting on the smile or putting on the Instagram picture, the Facebook status that's like, I'm good, I'm fine. Are you? Like, are you really?
Is everything golden?
Like, who are you trying to convince?
Yeah. That
Yeah.
is, I mean, that's sad. And I don't, everyone does whatever they do. Like, I'm not judging. Like, everyone's just trying to survive.
I mean, it's the oldest cliche in the book that it's like comparison is the thief of joy. But I really think that like discredibility is the thief of joy, is telling someone that their feelings are wrong or their perception or their reality is wrong when it's not. It's just theirs. And I am a victim of the mentality of the kids in Africa. Like, what could you possibly have that's wrong? And discrediting someone's feelings or what they think. I kind of think it's an insult to the universe, like if I don't talk about a feeling or a thought that I had, maybe someone else had the same thought and now they think that it's wrong. And it's just, I just think it's so important to be honest and to hold space for one another, even if you don't have advice or you don't have a way to go. A good friend of mine here in France she's studying to be like a parent psychologist. And so many of the things that she's learning, it's just like how to hold emotions for your children and how to not discredit them and how to explore them. Very like French Brene Brown vibes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if my parents, which I love my parents and we've been through hell and back and are so much healthier than we were when I was a child, of just like, if I could say my feelings are hurt, and instead of them being like, well, you're tough, you're fine, which is out of love. Obviously, they believe
or fear though too, right?
But also fear. Too. Yeah. So it's like, oh, your feelings are hurt. I'm listening. What happened? Can we talk about that?
It's hard for people to do that because they get uncomfortable. And I even like hypocritically, I absorbed that mentality in terms of not telling people that they were, not seeing things in the right way or trying to discredit their feelings, but in this idea of I need to fix it. Like, I can't handle you being upset, like with girlfriends or friends. And that's part of like a codependent thing, but it's like, oh my God, you're upset. Okay. How do we fix it? How do we do it? And I've had like,
I can feel better about myself.
Yeah, it's all about me because I'm feeling uncomfortable and I need to change this. And with my wife right now, I've gone through divorce and I'm remarried, and she's been so amazing at like helping me with just being okay with someone else being upset or hurt and just listening and not trying to help them. And I'm sure I've heard that message all my life. But what this podcast is like serendipity. It's like the right place at the right time with the right person. After going through enough stuff, it finally just resonates. And you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And because of that, I was able to be there for my daughter when I went through a divorce, of just allowing her to be upset and saying, I know you're upset. I know I fucked your life up at this moment. You're young. It's okay. You can tell me that you're mad at me. It's okay. I can deal with it. And I was struggling with it, but I knew it was the right way to be. And so I guess to you, like, you clearly have resentment towards people not acknowledging people's feelings or trying to like judge their feelings. And
oh my gosh.
What I want to hear is the moment that you were like, I've had a fuck enough. Like, I'm not dealing with this shit. This is the problem. Finally, I understand like why I'm this way.
Oof. Oh, what a hard question. I, as I mentioned, I grew up in a very conservative Christian Southern environment, and lots of therapy later. I've learned that you can only love someone and support someone and listen to someone as much as you do that to yourself, and with my parents in particular, because your parents are the most important factors in how you're brought up, obviously, if you are brought up by your parents or parental figures. And so much of my, as you said, the word resentment has kind of fallen to the wayside because I've forgiven myself. And I've been like, I didn't know any better. They didn't know any better. So let's just try to be better together. And sometimes people aren't receptive to that. Like, there's going to be people that want to stay stuck, or they want to stay in the same way that they think or in their closed mindset. And it's kind of a big inspiration behind Cageless is like, I'm not against cages if you know that you're in a cage and you're the one who put yourself in there.
I want to just go back to one thing that you said, which is basically people, it's okay if people stay stuck, if they're in their zone and they're stuck. And I don't judge a stuckness, and I don't think you do. You're saying it's okay. Were you ever at a point where you were like, I'm stuck?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think that they're being stuck and being in denial are sometimes two different things.
Yes.
And then there's also the choice of, like I said, some people want to stay in their cage and they're comfortable with the way that they are. And I say that's okay as long as you're not harming yourself or you're not harming someone else, in terms of lifestyle and health choices. But like there was a time I was in a doctor's office, and I was so deep in denial of how bad my eating is. I was kind of in a phase where I was like, it's not that bad. And I'm not going to therapy as much and things have subsided and my parents are off my back they're not on my back as much and I'm okay. But I was having really bad digestive issues. And I was like, well, I eat super healthy and I exercise all the time. And it's like, well, yes, to an extreme. And I was speaking with this doctor and he was asking me all these questions and getting my weight and everything. And I was like, yeah, but I do everything right. And he was like, you do know, like, you're not Superwoman. Like, you can't do everything right. In fact, like when you don't eat fat or when you don't take a day off from running, then like you're that's not healthy for your body. Like you're not Superwoman. And I was like, but I do everything right. Like I do everything by the book. And he was like, no. Like you can't do everything right,
Wow.
And I was in such a deep mode of denial of just like, but I can be perfect. Like I can be perfect. And it's like, actually being perfect has some downsides.
So
your body doesn't function correctly.
Was that the first time and the first person to ever give you that opinion or perspective in a way that you received it in your life?
I think that was the first time that someone like really shot it to me straight. And it made me mad because I was like, no, I do everything right, which is the problem with anorexics is that we have a problem with being perfect. And whenever you can accept your humanity, which is a lot of like where my spirituality comes in, is thank the heavens that there is a God and I'm not her. Like I'm not God. I am not the creator of everything that like I cannot possibly do it because I've tried and I've almost died. So it's kind of like it's the serenity prayer, anyone who's been in Alcoholics Anonymous, been in any sort of recovery program knows it. And it's God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things that I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And when I think you accept your humanity and your reality, that's when you can actually start living. You get out of that denial of, oh, well, if I just do this or if I just do that, actually, like, you're not meant to be perfect. You're not meant to always have it together.
Well, and you're proof that even if you are on the outside, you do have everything. You can still be in pain. I mean,
absolutely.
Think about the, teen suicides and think about suicide in general. And, when you see like a celebrity who appears to have it all, right? What do they need? What does someone with $100 million, a big fan base, people who appreciate the work they're doing,
all the
what
awards, all the everything, right?
What do they need? Like
just themselves,
Yeah, but they don't have that. And it's really, really sad. And,
so sad.
That's where depression and there are other circumstances, obviously, that lead, to self-harming and suicide. But that like construct that if I just had this, then I would be happy is
the
like
dirtiest trick.
Oh, it's like the fucking carrot that is like you're guiding Bugs Bunny to jump off the mountain or whatever, or Wile E. Coyote, whatever the hell it is. It's like it's always a moving target. So how do you love yourself Like, that's a hard question. It's hard to just say, oh, I want to love myself, so I'm going to love myself. It's like
Yeah.
you have to have that shift in your brain that says, oh, okay, I get it. I get it for this minute. And even if I don't keep this for the rest of my life, I know that I've had it. And so you can never
Yes.
take that away. And so
That's so
maybe
good.
next time I fall into something, I'm going to remember that that happened again, or I'm going to meet someone, or I'm going to watch something, or something is going to, I'm almost going to die. That's going to zap my head and just, okay, now I can get back to
Yeah.
this. This is the most important thing. I need to love myself.
That's good.
You just discussed how you ended up being hospitalized.
Let's see here. Okay. The day that I ended up in the hospital, I so my kidneys were shutting down because obviously I was malnourished and I was treating my body very poorly.
Where were you then?
I was in Texas.
Okay. So you're living and working in Texas.
I was living alone.
And then how did you know you needed to go to the hospital?
Oh, I was in so much pain.
What kind of pain?
I felt like my back was going to fall off of my body. And anyone who is anorexic understands you can go through a lot of pain. Sadistically, you usually like it. But I was in a type of pain that I still can't really explain. And I was like, I don't know if I'm dying. I don't know what's going on. I've been lying about how much I've been eating, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, I have to go to the hospital. So I drove myself to the hospital. I told my mom that I wasn't feeling well. And I remember parking. And as I was walking up the steps to the hospital, I fell and I couldn't get back up. So I crawled and I was crying. And then I was admitted and my mom showed up.
Okay. So now there are moments in there that we need to discuss. Number one, you falling, right?
Yeah.
And not being able to get up. You must have been scared shitless. Like your body had no energy to get up.
I just remember thinking, I don't want to go like this. I have so much more to do. I'm so embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed. I thought I had control over this.
So that was the moment, like this experience to get to the fall and be able to crawl was like the moment where you basically gave in a certain sense.
Yeah. Because after that, I went into a rehab program.
Okay. So now they admit you, I'm sure they took you to a bed right away. Like they obviously assessed the severity of your situation. So what were you thinking before your mom came?
I remember sitting in the hospital waiting room and crying because I was like, I'm so embarrassed. I failed. I thought I could keep it together.
So painful.
Which is really sad because if I could go back 5 years ago and say like, you shouldn't be embarrassed. You were doing the best that you could with what you had. But just like it was a failure of being perfect.
And then when was it that you realized that you didn't fail and that you were doing the best you could? Like now you wish you could go tell yourself then. When did you actually learn that and accept it?
Oh man, years later, I would say. Probably 2 years later.
And do you remember how it happened or what was going on?
I think when I decided that I wanted to start traveling and not living in one place, in a very liberating and intentional way, I started gaining weight. And that was really, really difficult, obviously, for a mentality that it's like, even when anyone who's been a bodybuilder or in the fitness world, it's like gaining weight and losing weight is a very scientific thing. And the way that I chose to gain weight wasn't this, and most anorexics are like this. It's like, oh, I'm just going to have fun and like eat. Like our brains don't work like that. You don't get to just have fun and eat. And it's not like when well, I've never been pregnant, so I can't say, but like, oh, you're pregnant, let's eat more, let's have more fun. Or I've gained, or I want to gain a little weight because I want a bigger butt or whatever. It's not like that. It's like, this is my health and I'm going to do this the correct way. And so having to be on a specific program, from the time that I was in this rehabilitation program to, okay, Jenni, this is real life. you don't have to fill in a chart of what you're eating and how much you're eating, but you are going to try. You're not trying to lose weight. You're trying to actively gain weight. What's the reins here? What's the reins of like, you're living, you're not controlling what you're eting, you know?
It's that uncomfortable world.
It's
because
so uncomfortable.
It's so foreign to you.
Oh, I'd never done it in my life up to that point. You know, I started counting calories before I could do long division. So it's like living abroad and living in places where you are given a meal from like the Mediterranean Sea that's like cooked by this person who's been a fisherman and his grandfather was, and they use the most amazing oil, and you're, you know, eating it and you're like, okay, but how many, I wonder how, well, like what the fat to calorie ratio. And then I remember where I was, I stopped myself and I was like, stop. This is like time to live now.
Okay, so that's the moment I want. You just said, remembered it. So what was it?
I was in the Mediterranean, and I was eating alone because I love eating alone now. It's not this like scary dungeon in my mind thing. And I was eating fish and fresh vegetables. And I remember like shutting her name is Edie, eating disorder in my head. I was like, shut up.
I
like
love that.
Stop. Look
I'm gonna
where
enjoy
you are.
Damn fish right now.
I'm going to eat this fish and it's going to nourish my body. And I'm so lucky that I get to eat it with my favorite person, myself.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's so interesting when I talk to people and I ask them for moments of like change, like, well, I don't really have one. And then we just keep on chatting and then.
Yeah. No, you're good at your job. You're a good journalist.
Thank you. Relentless and curious, I guess, is really what it is.
I think that's what makes you great.
That's very sweet. And it's hard to hear someone say that you're great. But even if it is said lightly, trying to
You take my flowers, water them if you want.
I like that too. There have been some good little phrases thrown out in this, which I'll put on the website and stuff, so they won't be lost. So can you describe your transition through rehab? Because I'm sure when you got there, you were like, okay, this is a huge mountain to climb. Like, how the fuck am I going to change? So can you describe that a little bit?
First of all, I want to be very clear. I did an outpatient program. So I went into a therapist office and I had like a team, a nutritionist. I did not sleep at a specific place. I came in and out. And it really wasn't like I have a big mountain to climb. I was like, I knew this was going to fucking happen eventually. I might as well just do it. The things that I learned throughout rehabilitation and the conversations that I had with my team was, I still use them today. If I do have intrusive thoughts or if I do want to go back on behaviors.
So what were some of those like things that you learned?
A couple of things. Something that I still do very consistently is I look at myself in the mirror and remind myself that my body is the ideal body. I don't need to look like Marilyn Monroe. I don't need to look like Kendall Jenner. I don't need to look like Taylor Swift. I don't need to look like Beyonce. I am my ideal body. And I say that no matter how it looks, like, you know, like whether I weigh 5 more pounds or 5 less pounds, or if I have a mosquito bite on my stomach, like my body is my ideal body. And I try to tell myself that every day. And then when I wake up in the morning, I'm a huge affirmations girl. So writing down affirmations and practicing gratitude is really important.
I do that as well. I go to bed every night, like saying like such sweet things to myself.
You should. I also pray every morning. The first thing I try to do before I reach for my phone, before I do anything is I ask God, like, God, what's the very best that you have for me today? And can I have it? And then I also ask, God, will you pleasantly surprise me today? And by the end of the day, usually there's a pleasant surprise.
That's great.
And then I also have a folder on my phone of voice recordings that because people with mental illness, anyone who knows, your brain is not the best person to give you advice when you're depressed. You would not ask an anxious person, how to not be fearful. So why would you ask a depressed person how to be happy again? So what I have done is like I compile notes and things to remember of as you mentioned, like things, it's cliche, but things do get better, Jen. Like, here's a note that it's like the sun comes out, wait for the sun, like from your future self. Please wait, you know?
I just got the chills. I love doing this
Yeah.
podcast because it's honestly, it's not selfless. It's not altruistic. I fucking love it. Like that body experience that I just had when you said that, that's such a valuable thing. And it's so easy to do. And so
Mhm.
it basically, when people listening, if you go through periods where you're really down, remember this as a possible trick. Like
Yeah.
do a little voice recording when you're happy and you're like, oh my God, I'm so happy today. I know I'm going to get, sad, or it's possible that I will fall
Yeah.
into sadness, but like, please know that things change. Because when you're
Yeah.
in that depression, you're upside down and you're not
Because
thinking.
yeah. And you're so, for one at least, because I have a tendency to think, oh, well, I know better than everyone else. I don't. But like, it's easier to take advice from my past self or listen to things that I wrote down because as someone who has been gaslit pretty drastically by people that I've loved, it's like, I don't want to be a person that discredits my feelings or thoughts. So I'm going to validate them for myself, and another huge thing that has helped me is future self journaling, is creating, there's a template that I've used it's 5 sentences that it's neurologically proven that when you do them first thing in the morning for 21 days, it rewires your brain in the way that it thinks and the way that it speaks to itself, of just like, today I am grateful for, today I will focus on, et cetera, et cetera. And that's been so helpful too. And learning that my brain isn't me. My brain is my brain and it knows what it's taught. And, a huge resource of mine is the Huberman Lab podcast. He's a great friend of mine and has done so much amazing work for health at large in the world. But I think that learning is the best medicine of all. And it's just like, I'm not alone. Actually, I'm really not that special. There's a lot of other humans out there that
Doesn't
have
that
been
just kill you
studied.
though? Not
Yeah.
being the best, not being special.
What's is it Ralph Waldo Emerson that says, now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good.
Oh,
I think it's him.
that's amazing. I love that. I don't know
So
why
it's like,
I don't remember that at all, but I love that
is it
saying.
Ralph Waldo Emerson? Well, you'll
It's
have to
someone. We'll
fact
look
check
it
me
up.
on
We'll
that.
fact check it. It's interesting also what you said of like you're not special in a way that you are special because you're you, but
Mhm.
you're not special in terms of societal, like you're the apex of
Right.
whatever anyone would want to be in any particular career.
I have learned, especially in since moving across the world permanently, because I've been traveling for a few years, but I am such a small fish in a big pond when it comes to social circles and rebuilding a career and a life and all of these things. And it's like, I'm kind of not special and it's kind of awesome. It's like, wow, the one thing that I feared. And when you can embody the thing that fears you most, nothing can hurt you.
I think that goes along with one question I like to ask is like, how would you define your purpose? And when did you learn what your purpose was?
Ooh. Well, I would define my purpose as healing loudly so other people can do the same.
I love that expression. I would love to know if there are any more moments that you can kind of think about in your life where like something unexpected happened that led to a shift in your perspective.
When I was traveling, it was a year or two ago, I met someone at a bus station and I was eating at this point. I was like eating like a sack lunch on the ground waiting for a bus in Croatia. And I got to talking to this girl and she was in a transition of a job and she got my Instagram and a few days later she sent me an article that she wrote about me, about like I was at this bus station and I came across this girl she was eating so passionately. Like she was literally eating like a sack lunch and she was eating passionately. And we had this really passionate conversation about life and transitions. And then I found out that she had an eating disorder and she used to not eat at all. And I'm just so shocked by this American girl, her talking about how she was scared to make a transition in life and taking it back to, my transition of choosing to heal and choosing to eat rather than not eat was a huge eye opener for me.
That's amazing. It's another moment.
Yeah.
Another moment that comes into your life because it gives you the strength to continue, right?
Right.
It reaffirms that you're doing something that really can help a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right? Because she found out about that you had an eating disorder based on your Instagram, right?
Right. And the podcast. Yeah.
So if you didn't do that, she wouldn't have known and her life wouldn't have been affected in that way.
Right.
And if she decided not even to look you up,
right,
then her life wouldn't have changed. And she was going through a time where she needed to meet you.
Yeah.
Which is serendipity, right? Which is that there is a bit of spirituality in this. Shit happens for a reason. That is total proof of it right there.
Yeah.
I love that. So last two questions and we're done, basically.
Okay.
What are you most grateful for in life?
Most grateful for in life. I think I'm most grateful for this is gonna make me cry. I think giving myself the opportunity to change and accept good things. And I think that the best things come in the form of relationships with yourself and with other people.
Beautiful. And then what would you say to someone who was going through a rough time, whether it's kind of related to your what you've experienced in life or something else, and they feel like in a place of hopelessness? What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I think that when people find themselves in a place of hopelessness, it's really easy to think, the sun's never going to come out. Things are never going to get better. I'm going to be alone and things are just going to continue to get worse. I think that the sooner you're you and honest about it, the sooner the people looking for you will find you. And, kind of what we talked a little bit about earlier, it's so important to not be alone. And it's so important to discuss who you are in your life and the things that you believe with other people solely for the fact that it's for them too,
That's good because it makes it not all, because some people feel like they're going to be a burden on someone else by like talking about their issues. And I'm happy you said that because it's really important. It's a nice way to end the podcast of when you have an interaction with someone and you talked about the importance of relationships, it's like a mutually beneficial situation, regardless of the topics that you're discussing.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being so vulnerable and open and just your spirit and your ability to kind of convey what you had gone through and where you're at now. And I'm really, really excited for you to be where you are. And I wish you, nothing but health and happiness and success on your journey to being special. No, I'm just kidding.
So good.
All right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your evening. And thanks again. I hope you enjoyed, being on the show.
So much. You're so deep. I think this is for sure the deepest interview I've ever done.
Wow.
You're so good. Good. Very good at digging.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to us staying in touch. And, I look forward to you continuing your journey of healing loudly.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and are inspired by our guest. If you want to find out more about us, our guests, and some potentially helpful information that might speak to you at the moment, please visit our website at www.mindframeshift.com and check us out on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at mindframeshift, all one word. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please call the Crisis Support National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or text NAMI at 741-741 to connect with a trained crisis counselor to receive free 24/7 crisis support via text message, or call the NAMI Healthline at 1-800-950-NAMI. That's 6264 for free mental health information, referrals, and support. Thank you very much again for listening. And remember, shift happens.